Before I introduce tonight's guests and the program, we do the land acknowledgement for the Toronto Reference Library. The Toronto Reference Library is on Indigenous land. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, aka the Six Nations Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. Toronto Public Library gratefully acknowledges these Indigenous nations for their guardianship of this land. We'd also like to remind and reaffirm as Torontonians and Canadians our accountability to these Indigenous nations and to all Indigenous peoples and communities living in Toronto. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for this land, its waters, and all of the biodiversity in the Great Lakes region. All of those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So welcome to Not Now, But Right Now, Print Media and the Rise of Toronto's Hip-Hop Scene, a program held in conjunction with the TD Gallery's current exhibit, For the Record, An Idea of the North. For the Record is on display until April 28th, and it was produced by the Toronto Public Library in partnership with Northside Hip Hop Archive, curated by Dr. Mark V. Campbell and Dave DTS Clark. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's host, Jwyze. Jelani Jwyze Niaz is the quintessential hype man and MC. Once a key member of the Soul Controllers, he has a radio background that includes 10 years as the dynamic voice of the Trauma Unit on Flow 93.5 FM, as well as stints in Community, the Master Plan Show, CIUT 89.5 FM, and internet radio. Jwyze also has an unrelenting dedication to the community, which has earned him numerous awards, including the Arts Starts upcoming Community Artist Award, Factor Demo Grant, and the Toronto Arts Council Writers Grant. As a musician MC, Jelani has released an acclaimed solo album, Proverbs and Herbs, which spawned the regional hit Mr. Lucky, produced by Socrates, Rich Kid, and Color Brown. He's a member of the group Sevens along DTS, the founder of Canada's longest hip-hop radio show, The Master Plan, and Color Brown. His new single, Miss Me, is available on all platforms February 22nd, 2019.
I'm really happy they got that last part in. Good night, everybody. Okay, we're gonna try that one more time. You know, this is a hip hop thing, so we got our vibes up. It's call and response, participatory kind of vibe. So once again, good night, everybody. All right, people's in the audience. We feel good. Tonight we're gonna talk about hip hop publications and magazines and the writers and publishers of those projects and what that meant for hip hop, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, in the pre-internet era, the early internet era, and now in the, what they call it, I read 2.0 era, internet web 2.0, the social media kind of era. So that's the scope of what we'll be talking about tonight. We got such a loaded panel, man, such heavyweights around here. I'm not gonna go through their whole bios like they went through mine, but I will give you the you know what I mean, some of the highlights, Cole's notes. I like that, thanks. So we'll start at the end. At the end, we have Rodrigo Bascunian. He's the founder and editor of Palm Magazine. He's an Emmy Award winner for Hip Hop Evolution, which y'all might have seen on Netflix. If you haven't, please check it out. I really enjoyed it. Well, thank you. Next to him, we got my man Chris Penrose. He was a writer for Word Magazine. I don't know if y'all remember Word Magazine, one of the really dope magazines, and the Toronto Star. Give it up for Chris. Next to Chris, we have Priya Ramanujam, co-founder and editor of Urbanology magazine and digital producer at the Toronto Star. So let's give her props, please. Next to Chris, we have Del Cowie, former editor of music from Exclaim magazine. He worked at CBC Music, and he was also one of the writers on Hip Hop Evolution as well. And last but never least, we have my man Phil Vassell, co-founder of Word and the Toronto Music Festival and also the Irie Music Festival. So one more time. I know y'all might get tired of clapping, but they all deserve it. And so here we are. So enjoy. We'll start out with a question for the publishers. And just real simple and easy. Who or what inspired you to start your respective publications? And how long was it from having the conception of the idea to the first issue coming out?
I'll go first. Sure.
Go for it.
Do you want the long version, the short version? What are we talking? How much time do we have here?
We got about an hour. Give us the medium version.
All right, the medium version. I started in 1998 working on the magazine. The first physical copy came out in '99. The website actually predated the magazine by about a year. And the main reason was, and I'm probably, it's going to be echoed, I feel, by Priya and Phil, is just you wanted to see a different voice in the space. And for me at the time, you know, obviously the big magazine stateside was the source, but, you know, only would highlight certain things. There were holes, in my view, of course. And then in Canada, we had Mic Check, which, you know, really, Denton should be here as well. I don't know where he is. But we had Mic Check. Of course, we had Phil and Word. There had been Boom earlier. But yeah, I just felt like there was a space. And then as myself as a writer at the same time, I was sort of impatient. I was like, I don't want to work my way up. I'll just start my own thing, which is just insane logic in retrospect. But, you know, that's how I was thinking. I was like, if I start my own magazine, no one can tell me what I can and can't write. And that was a big part of it. So, I mean, that's the pretty short version of it. I could go on, but I'll leave everyone space.
So, is this? There we go. Okay. So as Rodrigo said, I probably would echo some of the things that he said, but so Adrian, who's in the front row, and I started Urbanology together, and we kind of started it as kids, like we were just in college, barely into our 20s, and we really just wanted a voice that could be on the newsstand, that could be out in the city, in the country, that would reflect some of our own experiences and our passions. And all of our, like literally the first few issues of Urbanology, the vast majority of the people who worked on it were people from our neighborhood, which is Malvern and Scarborough. So some of them had experience. We were just taking the experience that we had from college, myself in journalism and Adrian in digital media arts, and kind of passing it along to the people in our neighborhood, because we all just wanted to have this magazine that could represent us and our stories and the universal stories that come from some of the experiences that we had. And I came up, I talk about it a little bit in this piece that I wrote for Mark for the record, but I came up reading Peace and Word and Pound. I used to get it from the store called Rock the Soul in Malvern Town Center, and or Rock and Soul, and like I enjoyed reading things from the Canadian perspective as much as I grew up also reading Vibe, The Source, and Double XL. So we just wanted to carve out this little space that we could share our experiences, and we didn't really know what would happen with it. To answer your second part of your question, we started, I think, in the summer of 2004 and launched in December 2004, and didn't really have a plan past the first issue. But then when we put the first issue out and started giving it out, people just wanted more, and they just wanted it, so we kind of just set ourselves up for having to continue. So we said, okay, I guess we'll see how it goes.
I feel like I'm the old guy here because we started Word Magazine, my wife and I. Donna's over there in the back. Put your hand up, Dana. I believe it was 1991 when we got married. We went to Brazil, and while in Brazil, we were at a point where we were wondering, okay, what is next for us? I was working at CBC, and shout out to Ingrid Walters here, who was at CBC at the time. And I just, had this hunger for doing something other than what I'd be doing at CBC National TV News. We felt that what was out at the time was basically Cher and Pride and the camera, and that really didn't speak to a younger generation. So we wanted something that was hip, something that was funky, something that would be risky in terms of some of the stories that we covered. And we made sure we went out and found some of the top writers, some of the top photographers, some of the top cartoonists and illustrators. And in our very first issue, the cover story was a story about boys in the hood. And Ingrid right here got us the interview with the director of Boys in the Hood, and from that point on, we were off to the races because we were doing something that none of the mainstream publications were touching, and nobody else on the block was really doing the kind of stories that we were doing. Now, having said that, it was important for us not just to be a quote-unquote hip-hop publication. We wanted to cover the arts from a black urban perspective, and so we didn't define ourselves purely in terms of hip-hop. We wanted to be able to talk about music and film and theater and dance and, visual arts and photography. So those things became foundational to Word Magazine. And I look around the room and I see Clive Walker over there, who is a reggae historian, also one of our writers that contributed to the publication's early beginnings. So that was the genesis. 6 months after I came back from my honeymoon, I took a leave of absence, a year leave of absence from CBC, and they warned me, don't go out and embarrass us, and I said, no, you got nothing to worry about. And a year later, they asked me if I was coming back, and I told them, no, this is something that I really wanted to do, and this was my love, and we, along with my true love, went about doing Word Magazine.
All right, that's amazing, man. Anything else to add?
I just really liked Phil's story. I just wanted to add that.
No doubt. For the writers, I always want, and I always wanted this about, especially writers who write for magazines and who write articles. What inspires you to become a writer? Writing is a very lonely sport. It's something that you do mostly by yourself. Before you hand it over to an editor, and then writing for magazines, articles especially, is even more niche than that. What inspired you to become a writer, and what was it like to see your first article in a magazine or in print? Is it, you always hear about artists when they hear their first song on the radio, but what's it like for a writer to see, your byline and your article?
Okay, so I'll go first. Yeah, I think my first article, actually, because, do you want me to talk about my first article? No, it wasn't even in Canada, actually, because I grew up in England, and one of the first things I wrote was just shortly before I left England. I was like 13 or 14 or something, and there was like the West Indian newspaper, national newspaper in England, I think, which is called The Voice, had this kind of youth record review section, and I thought for some reason that I could contribute something to it. So and they sent me this 12-inch, and I was so happy to see this 12-inch in the mail, and I kind of just wrote a review about a song that I can't remember at all. But I remember carrying the clipping around for a few years in some little thing. But the reason, I guess, to get to your actual question, it's essentially because, I was, it combined my two things that I was really passionate about, which was reading, and music. My dad was a DJ at the time, so I was hearing music constantly, and he was constantly kind of giving me, so that was all around me. Not that it's not for anyone else, but it was also really part of his life. And at school, I was just reading a lot, and English was my favorite subject, so it just kind of combined those two things. That in terms of seeing my name in print, like I'm saying, that was kind of it. I had like that ego rush when I was a kid, but later on, for me, I feel like honestly it was bigger than that. You start to think about the stories that you want to tell, and it wasn't so much about having your name there; it's more about kind of the stories and the things that aren't being covered that you wanted to kind of see be represented.
I feel like for myself, I think back to listening to albums, listening to songs when I was a kid, and not being satisfied with just what the song or the album presented. I just had so many questions. like you listen to a Nas album, and like what was the difference between working with Primo and working with Q-Tip, and how involved was he, and like why did you choose that song order, and was there songs that got left off, and like, or ODB, has his birth certificate on there, and like how many different album cover versions were there before you got there, and before you could search that, like I would always want to know those things. I would be so curious about, the relationship of people, the crew that our artists were a part of, and the influences they had. And there would be lyrical references that are kind of open to interpretation and wanting to know more. So I think that's where the, being a writer came in, was that curiosity. And I also, like, there was another element too where when I started writing, just feeling I was really excited. The first piece was Chaclair that I did, and it came out of actually writing Phil some emails about Word Magazine, and we just got in these back and forth email conversations, and eventually he's like, do you want to try and write something? Here's the story, and gave me that challenge. And when I did see my name, like I felt a lot of pressure, I would say, because it's going back to that curiosity. I think a lot of people have that curiosity, but because there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of fans of a particular artist in this city, then a few people get granted access to that artist and then get to have a conversation with them on behalf of these tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. And so for me, it was like a really thoughtful thing and a lot of responsibility. And I always wanted to do the fan of any artist justice, that they're like, why is he asking them that question? Or how come we didn't ask them this? Or like really wanting to honor the responsibility that comes with that access. Because it's not because, I did something that got me access to that person. It's because this publication is a platform, and this artist has enough of a fan base in this city that we're being granted that access.
So you felt pressure when you saw your name?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also felt a glow. Like it felt good. Like it's just like, I think it comes down to just to your thing about hearing an artist hearing the song on the radio. Like it was something that I admired other writers, and it's a dream. And then you see your name in print for something you love doing. There's a glow that comes with like, I wanted to be able to do this, and here it is.
Nice. Let's talk now. One of my favorite, songs when I was a teenager, and my pops hated it, but was Wu-Tang, Cash Rules Everything Around Me. Cream, Get the Money, Dollar Dollar Bill, y'all. And we're to that point where, doing a magazine, it's not something that happens for free. So how did y'all make that happen? Because from what I'm hearing, I mean, there were no there was no big, somebody just came to you and said, here's a bag of money, do a magazine. So how did you make it happen so that, you could be sustainable and put out issues on a regular basis? And what did it take to get to that point where you felt like, okay, this is something that can sustain itself?
This is the traumatic part of the panel. We started with $500 that my friend lent me, and I got a cell phone, made some business cards, and just went from there. I had no idea what I was doing. Like literally, I was a bio student in university, and I had a radio show. I would been a DJ, and my sort of interest in media had been growing. And so, but when I started, I really had no idea what I was doing. I remember going to the library and taking out books about printing, magazines, like literally the physical process of printing. Like I started from nothing. So I was very naive, and I think the naivety was a saving grace. If I really knew what I was getting into, and I bet you Pri and Phil might say the same thing, they would be like, I'll never do this. But I was naive to it, and lucky in certain ways. It was very, very difficult to access money. Printing is super expensive. To give you an idea, we chose our first issue was a half-size format, so half the size of a regular magazine. We did that strictly to save money, but we printed 40,000 copies, which cost it was about $20,000. But because we had made so many errors, and we used this printer in Ottawa that they were just assholes. And they charged like $5,000 for design errors. And so they came up to $25,000. Then shipping was like, we shipped that first issue as far as Hawaii, which was just nuts. You know, like one box to Hawaii cost, I remember it was $80 to send a box. So our shipping bill was crazy. So we were making like massive mistakes at the beginning, and we had no money. All of this was on credit. You know, actually, our biggest, you know, unofficial bankroll at the beginning was Canada Post, because we could take forever to pay them. And so we would just like not pay them for a long time, and that was a lot of money you could kind of hold off. But you know, access to capital. I remember going to the Business Development Corporation, and you know, right, you had a business plan and everything, and they called me back and they had turned me down, and I asked why, and they said, well, do you have equity? And I was like, I don't even really know what that means. I was like, what do you mean? And like, well, do you own a house? And I'm like, I'm 22. Like, when was this supposed to happen? You know, I'm like 22. And they're like, well, you don't have equity, and like, we won't lend you money. And I was like, so, you know, quickly, you know, there's that irony of like, you know, the only people who can get money already have money, right? When you have no money, how do you access money is really like, that was the hardest part. I luckily had enough partners that like collectively we could spread the costs across credit cards, basically. But so, you know, and then making industry connections through being a DJ, you know, we were able to get some advertisers on fairly early. Virgin was an important ally early on, Sony as well, and that was through friendships, and they saw the vision, they liked what we were doing, and so we did get some early help, but it was nowhere near close to covering the costs of making the magazine. I think at our lowest point, we were about $200,000 in debt, which was crazy. I was like 25, and I was just like, luckily I was young enough. I remember my partner, he was like super stressed all the time about the money. And I was just like, again, the naivety just kept me going. I was like, it's cool, man, whatever, we'll make that 200. I had no idea how. We eventually did, you know, and, you know, but it took a long time, because at the beginning, and again, Phil, I know Phil and probably heard the same thing. People would say, well, let's see how far you go, you know, like the first issue is like, yeah, you might make one issue, but can you make 10 issues, you know? And so but of course you have to somehow make it to your 10th issue without any support. So by the time we got to like a 7th, 8th, 9th, it was like, okay, people are like, they're starting to believe. You've been around for a minute. Their money's not gonna just, you know, evaporate by giving you a check. So there's some faith there, but it takes a long time to build to that. And then eventually, yes, we started getting more and more advertisers. I mean, I think all three of our models were mostly based on advertising, not much newsstand sales, which are like fairly low for Canada anyway, or subscriptions as well. So for us, it was, you know, almost 100% advertiser driven. And so getting them on board was very difficult. And early on, the discrimination was crazy. Like, you know, 1999, trying to sell an ad for, you know, what we were calling a hip hop magazine. And I say this, I'm not even joking, I say this honestly. People thought they connected hip hop so strongly with criminality and gangsterism that I had to always like untangle that for them, you know? And it was just racist. I mean, there's no other word for it. It was just so racist, you know, and I can't tell you how many advertising meetings I went to with big firms where it was just basically like, it didn't take much to read between the lines, but it was like, we don't want to advertise in a magazine that is mostly for and about black people. And that was super disheartening. Like, it's 99 in Canada, is like, compared to where the US was, it's like, we might as well have been 1979. Like, it was so behind. Like, the understanding of what this culture meant, what this culture is, what it represented was just so behind. And that was a big hurdle to get over. We didn't have to do that with the record labels, of course, which really carried us at the beginning, and later on the urban clothing companies really carried us. But that mainstream support, like, you know, getting a Pepsi ad or a Coke ad, or, you know, I don't even know if I'd take it, because, you know, Babylon. But getting mainstream stuff like cars and anything like that was just out of the question. The agencies just didn't understand it, And I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to give you an example. The lengths we'd go to. I remember we were sponsoring a concert with Nas and with Jonathan Ramos of REMG, and Ramos was having the same problems of trying to convince people to sponsor what he was doing, and we basically offered everyone, say, look, this is one of the greatest lyricists on earth. He's doing a show. Come see what hip-hop's about. Come see who these people are. Come see the community. We offered that to every agency that existed. Not one person came.
Priya?
The original question was around like getting the.
Yeah, how did
the-
you make the magazine sustainable so that you could keep it going?
Well, we did a lot of like grassroots bartering type things, like where it would be like, oh, we need T-shirts for something. Okay, you're printing T-shirts. You give us T-shirts. We'll give you some promo space in the magazine. Like not exchanging money, just exchanging resources to try to whatever little money that we did have, try to use that for like the things like a printer is not going to do it on bartering, so we would have to pay the printer. The initial money to print like the first issue and whatnot, it's funny that my career came full circle because now I'm back at the Toronto Star, but at that time I was doing a radio room internship at the Toronto Star, and it's one of very few internships in the media that paid. So I was basically sacrificing all that money that a 19, 20-year-old would probably spend their money on. I was just taking it and putting it towards urbanology. Adrian was doing the same thing, and the few founding members of the magazine, we were just putting together like money that you would like pocket money that you would normally use to go out to do the things that I guess 19 and 20-year-olds were doing. We were just trying to put it towards the magazine to make it happen. We knew that we weren't going to be making money off of it. So really what we were doing was we were earning money elsewhere and putting it towards making urbanology happen. And then as the time went on, like Rodrigo said, gradually some people would start to believe and take out advertising, but we never had any luck with the corporate advertisers either. It was pretty much a very similar experience, but we did have like music advertisers and a couple of clothing advertisers, and then the odd other types of advertisers that would come in here and there that might be able to help us sustain it. But yeah, a lot of it was just sustaining it on us sustaining it ourselves and being creative with how we got what we needed by exchanging things that we could do, and not even just exchanging like promo space, right? We also have talents like writing or design or whatever. So if he could design your website for you and you could give us something in return that could get us something for the magazine, then we would do it.
I think both of their bootstrapping stories are very familiar. For Word Magazine, we took a slightly different path. Because we were a publication that spoke to a lot of what was happening in the downtown arts community and the music community, we were able to tap the record labels initially. We got some of the same support he mentioned, from Universal and BMG and Sony Music and occasionally Warner.
Yeah, right.
And we were also able to tap a lot of the folks in the arts community. So there's a lot of theatrical productions. There was a lot of performing arts type advertising that was out there that none of the publications in our community, except for Now Magazine, was really tapping into. And really, my vision at the time was to create a publication not unlike Village Voice. Village Voice was really the template for us. And so we straddled a number of different areas and were able to, get a lot of that support at the outset from those in the music community, those in the arts community, some in the black community, and surprisingly enough, a lot of you may be surprised to hear this, less than 10% of our advertising came from the black community, which was really difficult to accept, because I thought what we were doing spoke to a younger generation, not the Cher or Pride or Caribbean Camera generation, but maybe that was part of the problem because they couldn't get it. They didn't get it. But we were determined, you know, I mean, I'll tell you a personal story. I mean, within 6 months of producing Word Magazine as a free publication, I had to fire my best friend who was the advertising manager. And that was because he wasn't producing. And, you know, that was a tough thing to do, but I think it spoke to our determination to make this thing work. And I wasn't gonna go back to the CBC. You know, I'd made that promise to myself. 5 years was enough for me. And what made it easier was, I'll tell you another story. I was working at CBC National TV News with Ingrid over here, and I remember speaking to Sheldon Turcotte, who was the anchor for Midday News, and Sheldon asked me, so Phil, what would you like to do here? And I gave him the usual spiel. I want to be a journalist, retire, blah, 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 blah. And Sheldon said to me, you know what, Phil, get the hell out of here. You don't want to be here. And I said, why? He said, well, get out there, experience life, do other things, travel, whatever. And would you know it, within 5 years, Sheldon passed away. And that was it for me. I decided that at that point, whatever it would take to get Word to succeed, we were prepared to do that. And we, like everybody else, you know, we just kind of bootstrapped our way. I came from CBC with a journalistic experience, but I'd also worked in sales while I was at U of T. I started the SAC date book, and I sold advertising for the Student Administrative Council, and I was the first advertising manager at CIUT-FM. Some of you may remember that. I was part of the team that got the license. So I had a really well-rounded set of experiences where I could do what a publisher typically did, which was to balance your time between the editorial side and the advertising side. So that's what really saved us, was getting that background. And some of you may also remember that I'd worked at Contrast back in the day. Many of you may be too young to remember that, but you know, that gave me some additional sales experience, and I had a great editor in Clint Albino, so I came into this a little bit better prepared, and it was just determination after that.
Any writers in the room? Anybody in here that's a writer? Show of hands. Okay, okay. So this is a question for the writers in the room, especially those who are newer to the craft. How do you make money being a writer?
Sorry, was that a joke?
It was not a joke. That was the question.
Okay.
Or a trick question.
So I think okay, before I get to that actually though, I think what's interesting, you know, what was also important is if you are going to make money as a writer, you have to be, you know, someone who, you know, works on your craft a little bit, you know what I mean? So I think as a writer, for me, to have the confidence to even be approaching editors or approaching any of these magazines, I felt like at the time, you know, that was really important. You had to be kind of reading a lot, you know, so, you know, not only was I, you know, reading magazines like Word that were here and based here, but there, you know, magazines in the States like, and then I actually started to gravitate towards writers. So there were good writers that had their own voices, like Greg Tate, like Danielle Smith, when she was writing for Spin, and then she eventually moved over to became a writer at Vibe. And even though I would never write like any of these people, I admired at the fact that they had their own voices. Guys like Bones Malone, you know, you had a specific style and thing of writing, and that gave you confidence to kind of be yourself when you were going to write on the page. So I think that's the first thing you kind of have to work on. I felt like that was the thing that was important. So because again, you wanted to be able to talk about the things that were, for me, you wanted to convey certain stories and things that were around you. And yeah, so when it comes up to making money, I guess the thing is, the thing is that you have to be good for an editor to want to pay you. You got to be, you have to have been working on your craft and have been reading these other things and stuff to actually really kind of approach them. I know even at Word, for example, McLean Greaves was also a writer who had a really distinctive voice at Word. And, I'd read these columns and see kind of like what people would be doing, and then be like, okay, so this is what this person is doing. In a way, that became my school, was actually, I would read the way, after a while, you could break down the formula, especially when Vibe came out. There were so many articles in it, so many ads too. Like they really got the ads. They would be like 30 pages before there was anything, right? Before the masthead. But there were so many articles in it, and then after a while, I could break down like a formula, like editorially, like of how each article was written, and then I would be like, okay, this is how you do it. So then I just approached editors and try to write, not copying that style, but it was definitely a framework for me. So I felt like that was important. Now, in terms of money bit, I guess, for me, I was doing other things like, there's no way, given the amount of outlets that were in Toronto at the time, that you could sustain yourself if you were living by yourself. I started when I was still in university anyway, so York University, when I was going to York, it was really gave me the confidence. In a lot of ways, I did some stuff at Excalibur, the student newspaper, and there was a Black caucus there that would put out the Black History Month issue. That was huge for me in terms of confidence and building kind of my skills. And then after that, I started to write for Mike Check. I did some stuff for Mike Check at that time, and started to build to kind of build my confidence through writing through those magazines like that. But yeah, and at no time was I a full-time writer, you know what I mean? I was working at Indigo after a while and doing, and then writing, so you do shifts, do writing, kind of base stuff around that. And when I did get a full-time job, even then, it was like 9 to 5, and then 6 to 10. 6 to 10 was writing,
Yeah, agreed. I've never had a writing job that sustained me fully. Like, I think it was, make sure I did communications jobs, like did something with things with Canada Basketball, did things with, I'm writing for Word, but also working on Toronto Urban Music Festival and IRE with Phil and Donna as well, working in community centers for, part of the time, and then doing the writing work. And I think that's one of the things that, if there's one element of this panel, is the level of personal sacrifice, especially on the publisher side. Like, the writers, we're sacrificing our own livelihood and potential of our own livelihood, but the publishers were sacrificing potentially generational livelihoods to put these magazines out. And a lot of people wanted to do it, but not everyone was willing to make the sacrifice. So I do think a lot about how we can elevate our scene and elevate our industry to the point where we can have full-time writers, because I think that is a really important thing. But in terms of how going about it, I think a few of the things I came across was, relationships with editors is so important, and building those relationships, building that trust. A mentor of mine, Nick Davis, who's at CBC as well. I know we talked a lot about CBC here, but he's been an amazing person to me. And he's always study what you're pitching to. You're pitching a 10-minute doc to a program that only does 4-minute docs. Or you're pitching a 10,000-word article to something that does 250-word profiles, or you're pitching a political piece to something that does brand stuff. Do you really understand the publication or the outlet that you're pitching to? And then just also like with editors, I found as well, like once I started, like Phil, I'd write a piece and Phil would be like, okay, you need to work on this and here's some notes and all that, right? And once I started getting to the place where it's like, I send a piece in, he's like, oh, that was good. Then I'm working with Toronto Star and they're like, what is this? Like, what are you doing, you know? And had a completely different expectation, you know? Then I work with another magazine thinking, okay, now I got it. Like between Phil and John Thoreau at Toronto Star, like I think I know what I need to submit for editors. And then someone else is like, no, this doesn't work. So I think that element of realizing that editors are each has their personality and what they're looking for. And then just like how willing are you to deal with rejection? Because say for like the Toronto Star pieces, like I did maybe 15 or 20 hip hop pieces for them over the years. I pitched like 150 good ideas, at least, if not more, maybe 200 good ideas. And so it's being willing to have that positive relationship with someone who every time you give them a good idea says no, especially as a freelancer, and every once in a while says yes. I think like that kind of, and it's just not taking it personal. I think when you don't know that that's what everyone else goes through, you start to feel like, oh, maybe I'm not, this is not for me. But it was that combination of things that I think, keeps me going even now. Like I have goals as a writer now that, I'm, continue to go through, building those relationships with editors and learning the voice of publications and dealing with rejection, but having that persistence and that long-term vision in mind.
Just want to add something to what Chris had to say, because one of the things that we experienced at Word Magazine was we were trying to not just deal with, established writers who you had to pay established writers' rates, or at least be able to beg and plead. But we're also cultivating new writers, okay? And so in that relationship, there was a lot of give and take. We knew that when you looked at someone like Adele or Chris or, some of the other people that we were dealing with at the time, you could spot the talent, and those were the people that you wanted to work with. So you went the distance in terms of trying to cultivate them and their talents and their skills. And, if there was trust in that relationship, then, each person got something from it. It wasn't always, the dollars, as you were saying. But if there was honest trust in that relationship, I found that people are willing to go above and beyond in terms of wanting to be a part of the publication. And that's how we made it through. Because really, at the end of the day, you can speak about it as publishers here as well. The advertising revenue was just not there, and you were carrying, a huge debt from year to year and hoping that you're going to turn a corner on this. So you had to find people that were equally passionate about what it is you were trying to do.
All right, let's talk about, because our time is getting a little bit short here. Let's talk about one of your most memorable, craziest, or favorite times doing the work. Could be with the artist, could be with the deadline, anything like that, but something that sticks out in your mind when you think back over the years as putting in the work and getting things done. What's one of the most memorable stories that you got to tell? And anybody can set it off.
I guess I'm going first. Actually, can we bring up the Ghostface cover? It's the red one. Yeah. So there's a lot behind this cover. It became kind of iconic in its own. The photo has a life beyond the magazine, actually. If you just type in Ghostface into Google, it's like right up there. But there's actually quite a bit behind this. So one, at that time, and I don't even remember how we got our hands on this anymore, but that was the only Canadian hockey team jersey that was in black. So Nike had made that only one. It was like a prototype. I don't know why they gave it to us. I honestly don't remember anymore. We didn't even really know Nike like that, but they gave it to us, and they told us, yeah, you can use it. And we're like, this is dope. Like, we never seen Canada wear black before. And they're like, yeah, Wayne Gretzky doesn't like it, so we're not going to make anymore. And we're like, all right, whatever. So we take it down to New York, and Ghost shows up, and he has like two huge like security guys. Each one of them had a suitcase, one for the eagle and one for the Versace chain that's kind of coming off the bottom. And the pieces, the gold, the eagle was 7 pounds. And I think each one of them was about $500,000. And you can kind of see on Ghost's arm there's like a little brown thing sticking out next to his wrist. That's actually like a pantyhose. So you have to wear like a pantyhose and tissue under it because it was so heavy it actually hurt his arm. So it was like wildly impractical. But he, it was. He straight up was just like, this is just marketing. Like, I'm gonna go melt this thing after. Like, this is like, but it was genius. Like, it totally worked. Like, the golden hawk eagle, whatever it is like iconic in hip hop. And this photo, yeah, just like 10 years after, this cover was voted one of the greatest hip hop covers of all time by Complex, which is weird because it was Canadian and I wasn't even aware that they would know about it like that, but it really had a life of its own. I mean, actually, one more thing was Ghost, before he put the jersey on, he was like, you guys putting this magazine out in the US? And we're like, no. He's like, because I won't wear the Canada jersey, And we're like, no, we won't send it. Obviously we sent it. And over time, whatever, I think Ghost has come to appreciate it. I think we did a concert like way later on, and we printed up a giant version of this, and people stood next to it, and Ghost saw it, and he had love for it. But that was a fun moment. It was definitely a moment where, after this cover, and can you flip to the cover before this? The white one. Yeah. These two covers, these were back to back. So Redman and Socrates, this one came out October 2001. And actually, this is kind of a crazy story behind this too. We finished this issue on 9/11, literally that morning. We were finishing it. We had stayed up all night, me and the editor, Chris, slept in my basement. We woke up to finish the issue, and as we're finishing it, the towers come down. And we didn't really know what to do. We were like, do we stop? Like, has the world stopped? Like, what's going on? And we're just like, I guess we'll finish it. And we sent it in. We went to the printer that day to hand off the files, and it was as you can obviously, it was a super odd day, but for me it was deeply symbolic because the magazine was very much framed by the political environment of that time, and that was a defining political moment of that era. I mean, everything changed after 9/11. And our opposition and defiance to, the war on terror and to the Bush administration was a cornerstone of our identity. And this issue at the same time, graphically, this cover, this representation of Redman and Socrates, it really was the first issue where we got really wide recognition for the quality of our work. So I really feel like, I think this is our 9th issue, this is the issue where the magazine was truly born in both the aesthetic sense and philosophically. Like the 9/11 incident and the Bush administration really gave us sort of a framework and an impetus for all the work that would come later on. So that's the story behind those.
Wicked. Keeping it moving.
I think, the stories for me come back to the fact that as a writer, writing on music, most times it's like the label is set up like a whole row of 10 minutes or 15 minutes with an artist. You don't know if you're like number 1 or number 40 for them. This is not the part of the job that artists like at all. And so it can be really awkward, and they're hearing the same questions all the time. So, there's a lot of like flop moments for me, and there's really hard times where you're just not getting good material. There's this disinterest. But there's moments where you're meeting this artist for the first time and that connection happens. And those are the ones that like are really magical. Like I interviewed Jill Scott when the Beautifully Human album came out, and we were in a hotel room. She had some big hotel room with a lounge and stuff, and she cried 3 times in the conversation, laughed like from her soul, and like, you know, it finished. She wanted to hug me before we left, and then later on in the lobby, there were some other writers who were just talking, and she's walking by with her little entourage, and like slapped me in the back with a book she was holding. It was like, "What's up, Chris?" Psh, you know, and like John Legend was another one where Ordinary People hadn't come out yet, and I asked him about his writing, and he just sang me the whole song. He was like, "Oh, this song, Ordinary People, you're gonna love it." And he sings the verse, and he's like, "Yeah," and then the chorus goes like this, and starts singing the chorus, and those moments are very rare, but I would say like those are some of the types of highlights where, again, understanding that this is like a mechanism of the industry. They're just talking to you because they released an album, the label wants to sell them the album, the label has scheduled them to talk to a bunch of journalists, and they just want to get through it. And so those moments of magic that do happen in that are the ones that I think stick with me.
Jill Scott, boy, I'm mad jealous.
I think for me, there's definitely been a lot of really memorable moments. Like, to quickly say some of them, things like we got to do a photo shoot on Cherry Beach with Ziggy Marley, and we had this idea where he was putting out an album for children, and we had this idea to bring all the kids that were like related to people on our staff and have him take the picture with the kids, and he was just loving it, and he sang to them, he played his guitar. And that was cool. We had this opportunity to do something with Ice Cube, and our photographer, probably many of you know him, Che Kathari. He got an ice sculpture built with the West Side symbol out of ice for Ice Cube, and he gave it to him to do the shoot, and then he took it on stage with him at his concert. So these like intimate moments that we had with artists, definitely memorable. But I think I guess to piggyback off of something that Chris said, a lot of times you only get these really short amount of time with artists, especially if they're coming to Toronto and they're not from here, because they want to get all the publications in and maximize their media time, but they also don't always like doing it, so the label's rushing through it. What my most memorable, I think, was we did an issue. I didn't do that, but I brought the tangible copy. We did an issue in 2007 that was all Canadian. Like we called it The North Has Arrived, and we wanted to do this thing where we covered only Canadians in the issue. And we had 4 different covers. We had Julie Black, DL Incognito, Belly, and Point Blank. And that was the one that I got to write. So unlike most of the experiences where you are rushed and you don't get a lot of time, I spent days with Point Blank. So I modeled the type of experience that I would read in the XXL or Vibe or the Source, where the writer is spending a lot of time with their subject. So I went to family barbecues, I went to their residences, I went to, they did an interview at Flow, I went there with them, I went to their shows, like got to spend a lot of time with them and write this really like intimate piece on them. And it was at the time when they were putting out their debut album. They had Born and Raised in the Ghetto, and it was a big single like outside of Canada. So they were really getting a lot of kudos after having been putting in a lot of work for a lot of years. And then they did this cover story. And then I remember talking to one of the members later, and he was saying that something that stuck to him was his auntie had gone to the States and was in the airport, and she saw Urbanology, and she saw him on the cover of it. And that was big for him to be able to have that experience. So I think the whole that whole experience and the whole issue and what it represented, what it meant for us, also being that it was the time they were gentrifying Regent Park, like the whole gentrification was happening. I think that issue just was my most memorable experience.
Yeah, so memorable experience. I guess I've had a couple of surreal or just weird or just experiences in terms of artist interviews. I mean, like what other people have said here in terms of having a limited amount of time. I mean, the way I try to deal with that was always try to do some research and try to find something that no one had really talked about too much about them, or a little known fact, because that would usually open them up if you kind of drop that early in the interview, and then they kind of break from the script a little bit, and then they would kind of like, you know, be more easy and actually enjoy the interview a little bit more. But I remember sometimes you just have a strange situation anyway, and you get along. I remember Roots Manuva, who was a UK hip hop artist. The entire interview, he was in his bed, and he refused to get out of his bed. So I was just like, okay, this is how we're doing it, right? So that was memorable. He's an interesting guy. If you've seen his videos, he's a very humorous guy. And it was a great interview. But yeah, he was not getting out of bed. And then to keep the Wu-Tang, I guess, theme going here, I guess one of my first pieces for Exclaim, when I was writing for them, was meeting or interviewing the RZA for Wu-Tang. And so that was interesting because, you know, first of all, he was doing the Bobby Digital album at the time. The Bobby Digital album.
Sorry, so did you interview him as RZA or as Bobby Digital?
See, this is the thing, right? So he was Bobby Digital, but he was also the RZA. So it was multiple personality situation. Not only that, so he comes, he had like a good big suite in the hotel. So when I got in there, then he was like, you know, what's up? And he was gonna give me a pound, like, you know, just like regular, give me a pound. Except for the fact that he had like 3-inch spikes on every knuckle. Like, and I was like, I gave the tamest pound I ever gave in my life to this man because I did not want to get impaled. But yeah, and then, you know, and then afterwards the interview entailed him speaking in the third person or I couldn't figure out which personality was talking to me the entire time because he kept changing. So yeah, that was pretty memorable.
There are two occasions that kind of stand out for me. The first one has a hip hop reference, and that is the year for the Toronto Urban Music Festival. We were fortunate enough to feature Jill Scott and Mos Def together on the stage at the CNE. And not only was Jill performing within 3 weeks of her debut album, but we were able to have Mos Def headline that show. And at one point in the show, some of you may remember this, we got both of them on stage together and they did a duet on the show. And to me, it doesn't get any better than that. Just watching those two people on stage and watching Toronto, you know, in all its diversity, just having a hell of a time at CNE when they were so anxious at the time. I can tell you an inside story. When they heard that Mos Def was going to be the headliner, I got called in, and they wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to end up as a riot, because that same year there was an awards show in LA that ended up in, you know, fisticuffs and all this kind of stuff. So imagine here we are with over 10,000 people at the CNE bandshell, and we had police on horseback ringing the entire CNE bandshell stage. I remember saying to them, look guys, you're wasting your money. This is not what this is all about. And true to form, people just came and had a hell of a time. Nothing happened, and they all sort of went back to their offices and say, oh, I guess you were right. You know, and the other story is one that a documentary was actually made about it, And this is Michael Chambers. Some of you might remember who Michael Chambers is. His most famous photograph was what we refer to as the watermelon picture. Anybody know the watermelon picture? The watermelon picture was basically him taking a photograph of a black woman showing her derriere and a piece of, help me here, a piece of fruit that was perched on the top of her behind, pardon my expression. And for 6 months, we had letters going to the editors back and forth. There are those people who were so pissed off about what they saw as exploitation, and those who saw this as, true art from someone who was using photography to make a point. And to this day, I don't ever recall seeing something where people were so passionate about defending their position, and month after month after month, we had letters to the editor with people going back and forth at each other, talking about it. And if Black Lives Matter today, I can tell you that back then, black photography mattered.
Wow. Okay, well, we don't really have a lot of time. In fact, we're probably out of time. But I do want to open it up to the audience if there's, let's say, we'll go up to 3 questions and see if anybody has something that they would like to ask. I'll run out with the mic to you.
Just a quick question for, I guess, the publishers. You had mentioned something about sending magazines to the States, including Hawaii, as far as Hawaii. I've noticed Toronto's kind of like a co-signed city. I could be wrong, but I noticed it in some instances. So was there a moment where you felt like the magazine kind of had its own, like, I guess, aha moment where you're like, oh, my city's actually supporting what I guess the Ghostface cover would be one, but was there another moment maybe where you noticed that the city, like Toronto, is repping for this magazine or going for this magazine?
Yeah, so the only issue we ever distributed in the U.S. was the very first one, and we sent 7,000 copies down there. And then someone explained to me that advertising is split by territories, and that Americans don't want to pay for such a small distribution. Canadian advertisers don't care about what's happening down there. Another brilliant move that we made early on. For Toronto, we got love from the beginning. I remember the first issue had Michi Me in it. We had the Rascals in it. I know they're not from Toronto. We had Chauclair in there. And, doing the rounds at, CKLN, CIUT, and everyone just showed love from the beginning, was super supportive. The space was just very fertile, and I think because our intentions were genuine, we were all, lifelong hip hop heads, that, it's just, you've already proven yourself to be part of the community. So the fact that you're making something for the community is just like, all right, let's go, let's do it. Everyone was happy. It was very supportive. And it only got more as we went on. Definitely as a magazine proved itself and sort of grew in its ambitions and renown, that, yeah, that love only grew over time, that to the point where I think for a lot of artists in the city, getting a pound cover was like a hallmark for them or something to aim for. So, but I think from the very beginning, it was super supportive.
I think that sort of the aha moment might have been like when we would get letters to the editor early on, and some of the things that people would say, like how an article touched them or why this magazine inspired them, and why a particular thing that they read in it inspired them to maybe be a writer or a photographer or something like that. And then later on, like I remember there's a photographer who came on to do photography with us in our more later years. So like I think within the last 5 years. And she said to me that she got her first urbanology. She first found out about it when she was in grade school because her dad brought it home from like a community event. And so to see it like come full circle where now she's coming, applying to shoot for us and shooting for it. And she had been reading it all the way since she was in like grade 6 or something like that because her dad brought it home from a community event. It kind of showed me that we were making a lasting impact within the city and within the culture.
I don't know if there's any one moment I can think, just thinking about Clive Walker back there, reggae historian. I remember he did a review or critique having to do with Redemption song, was it? At Bob Marley. And I think that critique of, well, his work made it all the way to the UK, and someone, took exception to what he had written and responded to it. And Clive was on very solid ground in terms of what he had written, and it just kind of told us that what we were doing was resonating beyond Toronto. There was also, like I said, the photography moment where we weren't just at one stage in the publication's life. We weren't going for the artist cover. Who's the hottest artist? Let's put him or her on the cover. We had Michael Chambers as our art director, and for years, Michael's work defined Word magazine. And the kind of slightly risque stuff that he was doing was really starting to impact people. There were other photographers that came to the forefront and was doing work for us. A number of the people that ended up in the exhibition that Mark Campbell featured at the McMichael Gallery, a lot of those guys started out working for us, or at least were in the process of establishing their names and reputations, and did excellent work for us as well. Patrick Nichols is another excellent photographer that did some amazing work for us. On the cartoon side, we had some great work from McLean Greaves and some other people that really pushed the envelope in terms of what they were doing. So we saw that it was having impact when publications like Now Magazine started reaching out to Michael, or publications reaching out to Dalton Higgins, who was writing for us, or CBC hiring Nick Davis away from Word Magazine as one of our editors. We started seeing a lot of that happening with the people that were contributing to the magazine. Donna Nurse became an amazing writer, a book critic writing for Washington Post and the Globe and Mail and a number of other publications. So we started seeing the impact of the publication go way beyond Toronto, and internationally there were people from Argentina that wanted to subscribe to the publication. People from Iran wanted to subscribe to the publication. So that was the kind of resonance that we saw with the publication. And we also attempted to produce Word Magazine in Washington, D.C. and in New York. Those efforts didn't last for a long time because we went up against a recession that was happening at the time. But it was only because of the way people were reacting and responding to the magazine that kind of gave us the courage to say, hey, we're doing something that is fresh and unique here. And at the time, there was Vibe, but outside of Vibe and maybe a few other hip-hop publications, there was nobody really hitting it from the standpoint of saying, hey, these arts are connected, whether it's music or film or theater or dance or visual arts, all of these things are connected, and we wanted to be the voice for that, and a lot of people connected to that. I used to have...
cut you here it's because we gotta, I want to get in at least one more
Yes,
question.
go ahead.
So sorry, I really feel bad to cut you, but
No, go ahead.
We're gonna get in 2 more questions. So brother over there, I see you, and lady over here.
Hey, this question is, I guess, more so for the writers. Thinking about kind of the elements of hip-hop culture, and curious to know what you think of your role as a writer is. So, like, where do you fit into the puzzle? Are you sort of outsider critique? Are you insider preserver? Sort of like, what do you see your function, sort of, as a journalist?
I think that's for myself. You know, my first involvement in hip hop was as a DJ. I grew up in a part of Scarborough where, you know, King Turbo was on the bus with us going to school, and what was the Red Flame, another reggae sound, was rooted in our area. So just being exposed to the music through, like, birthday parties had like a sound level system in the basement when you're like 12, 13. Just being involved, like just freestyling and always writing, and so then being on radio as well. So I feel like I was very involved in the culture, but I also recognize that, like, you know, I'm a white male, you know, parents, European descendants as well. And so for me, there was a consciousness of my place in the music and in the culture was, as Rodrigo was saying, like, you show up, you're a part of it, you're giving to the community, you're involved in an authentic way. I think that was important, but it's also recognizing that there are elements of, like, race, class, gender, identity, sexuality that do play out in how I saw what I was doing, even writing for Word. Like, as Phil said early on, like, it was a magazine that covered Black culture from a Black perspective, and as a white male writing in that space, you know, that was something I was conscious of. And in terms of the bigger question of as a writer, like, I think it's your place to be a writer, you know, and I think the documentation is huge. I've been doing some pieces that, you know, and I think the Hip Hop Archive stuff that Northside Hip Hop Archive is doing is really showing us that there's so much that happened that was fundamental in shaping the city that was not documented. If the Power Move show had been on CBC, then these freestyles where Shirley Dynamo was going up against Bishop and Adam Bomb first kind of made his impression, like, we would have that audio. We don't. Like, maybe people have, like, cassette tapes of that somewhere in pieces, but there's really important parts of what happened in the city that now we're starting to understand. Like, Toronto is shaping music globally, and film is gonna follow that, and, you know, other visual arts and all of that are gonna follow that. Toronto's not gonna be known for culture through music, but through all these things. And what happened in the 90s in hip hop set the foundation for that. And I see writers as being a part of documenting that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the documentation angle of what Chris is saying. Especially, yeah, I mean, this was really, in terms of my role as a writer, that was the way I saw my role. I saw it as something where it was something that you wanted it to get out, something as you wanted to make sure that the points of view that the artists that were creating art were, you know, that it was getting out there, that people could understand it. And I try to come from a well-informed perspective about what, you know, they were trying to do, and my goal was to try to convey that to the reader. As a writer, I wasn't trying to necessarily center myself in that. I was just trying to convey that, and all of these magazines here did that, you know, and that's why they're all important, because, you know, if we were to look at the major media outlets in the city at the time, their coverage of this scene was very spotty at best, right? And so basically these were, you know, ground zero, grassroots, right? Everyone who was kind of working on these things, as you've heard, is, you know, it was their passion. But not only that, they were just tapped into kind of what was going on. And that's really important. And from that, and also what's really important is because of those outlets not having consistent coverage of the music and the culture that was going on, they became the primary outlets for people to actually trade. These places were training grounds for people, you know, not necessarily, I didn't go to journalism school. I don't know how many, I know that
I
Priya
didn't.
did, but, or did some, but, and those skills, I did try to kind of get some of those things. But a lot of times, I think, like hip hop, people just kind of learn by doing, right? And Rodrigo definitely learned by doing in terms of the publishing, right? But I mean, I think that's what was really going on. There's a lot of kind of figuring it out as you went. And from that, we've, if you looked at some of the alumni of some of these magazines, I mean, there are people that are doing all kinds of great things now. So, I mean, I'm thinking of Mic Check. I remember Nam, that's where I met Namigenyi, who went on to Much Music, who's on now on TVO. Like, she was that's where she started writing, right? So, and then there's other, there's countless people you could think of, that have come through, because if these outlets, if these publications didn't exist, they wouldn't be, these are trading grounds for people who may not have had those opportunities.
I think just quick, man, what you sparked for me as well is I never saw the role as a critic. Like, I did an interview with Chingy. I was not a fan of his music. Jermaine Dupri, at the time when I interviewed him, I wasn't a fan of what he was creating at the time. But I wasn't going to critique them or talk down. Like, they're doing amazing things. They're professionals in what they're doing. What's the story, And I think that was a big part of it as well, is like, we're not here to like add our personal like critique and our own likes and try to purport that as what everyone should think about it. It's like, what's the story?
Okay, no more sparking anything, okay? we got to get out of here just now. We got one more question.
Hey guys, this question doesn't pertain to anyone specifically, but in a general perspective, how important of a role did barbershops in black communities play a role, or how important was the role that it played in terms of just trying to get your word across? Because I kid you not, if it wasn't my brother bringing a magazine home, one of the ones that are featured here, I've seen them all at some point. I can guarantee you that I've probably seen all these magazines in the barbershop at some point. So I just want to know, what was your connection? What was the barbershop connection, if there was one, in terms of being established to where you guys are now?
You mind?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a footnote to all of this is, I actually built my distribution list from this very library. I would come here and I would get the phone books for every city in the country, that of note, sort of, because, I can't, where am I going to get that Edmonton phone book? But I could come here and I'd go, I'd look up record stores, write down every phone number, every name. I'd look up barbershops, and then like if there was like Caribbean restaurants and that type of thing. And then I'd go home and I'd call them, I'd tell them what I was doing, and you will take the magazines, And I literally, that's how I built it. Like, I made all, 1,000 of those phone calls on my own. I had like a number, I had to do like 50 a day or something. That was like, but yeah, like I actually built it from this library, which is kind of a crazy thing. But the barbershops was always a place, for sure, 100%. That was, after record stores, it was like barbershops and then restaurants. But, it was key, of course, massive.
Yeah, for me, for urbanology, it was definitely huge. Though I'm up here, the majority of the founding members of urbanology are all men and all frequent barbershops like all the time. So that was how they first started to take out get people to know about the magazine. They just go for their regular visit to the barbershop, take copies with them, hand it out to everybody, talk about the magazine. They debate things, argue things, and then bring that back to our editorial meetings. Also, barbershops was where we sold the magazines. So like Onyx Barbers, Cut Creator, a number of other barbershops all across the GTA. We would make these consignment deals with them. So you could leave 20 magazines, whatever you sell, you get part of it. You give us back part of the money. So like that was our newsstand, barbershops. Like, to us and within what we were doing, that was where people were going, and that's where they would be buying magazines from and want to find these magazines. They also were big subscribers to the magazines as well. So barbershops were hugely important to our distribution model, to our model of like all these things that you would hear of, like media terms, subscription models, audience engagement, and generating story ideas. Well, the barbershop was a pinnacle for that within urbanology.
I would just add, and I know you got to wrap up.
I'm easy this time.
I would just add barbershops and hair salons, because we found that a lot of women that were reading the publication, and we found that I think 51% of our readers were female. We found that we could reach them in the hair salons as well. You're going to be spending hours waiting, to get your do on right. So, we focused on those two as critical pieces. And that's where the conversations would start. That's where the critique would start.
Can I add one other thing?
No, go ahead.
One of our earliest fashion spreads, and one of my favorite, was actually in the barbershop. So we modeled the fashion shoot off of like the scene in the barbershop at Onyx Barbers, and actually that would be one of my most memorable fashion spreads that we had.
Can I just add? Bo,
What did we say about Sparky?
Hey, no, but watch. Bo, can you go to the last cover there? That's our last issue in a barbershop to represent Obama's election.
That was
There
either
you
a
go.
planted question or a really good one. One of the two.
It's a great question. On that note, I'd like to thank our panelists for all the knowledge and expertise and great stories they brought. You guys were all amazing. I'd like to thank our audience for your patience and your interest and the way y'all listened. I could feel it. And also all the questions were amazing. So give yourselves a round of applause. And last but not least, what we have to say our thanks to Northside Hip Hop and the Toronto Reference Library for giving us the space to make this happen. Big shout out to Mark and DTS for spearheading this movement. I call Mark the archivist. Like if I was a comic book writer, that would be his character, because he's really making sure that between him and DTS, they're really making sure that our history gets added to the history. You know what I mean? Which is super important. So definitely give it up to them. And with that said, thank you. Good night. Take your time. Talk to people. Network amongst each other. And hope to see y'all at the next one.